Every once in a while you hear a story you got to share with other people, especially if that good news story comes out of Lethbridge, and we get to be extra proud as well. Our guest today in Local Connection is Brian Bute, and he's a local structural engineer. I'm not sure, but did I get that right? Is that the proper terminology here? Okay, yeah. It's neat to see, what you've been doing here has actually captured the attention of secular news outlets as well, and they're going, hey, this is a good thing here. You've used your gifts from God and, your engineering abilities to help out people in other countries. In this case, the one that's making the news is, I think, in El Salvador. You went down there to help design a building, right?
Yes, we designed a second floor in the ministry center, a ministry center with the Christian and Missionary Alliance.
All right, so they had some needs there, and then their church outreach and so forth. All right, so you're going to say, all right, we're going to come there, help you with some of the practical things there. You've also done this in, I believe, I think you said South Sudan and Ethiopia, building some schools. Is that right?
That's true.
So the same thing, volunteering time and talent to actually go help these people. That is just awesome. Now you use your own company to do this as well. Is that right? BCB Engineering. So and some of the people on staff with you there as well. But
they help out with the drawings and the design work on these projects.
Yeah, now that just doesn't take just volunteer hours. That costs some money as well. So obviously you're quite committed to that. And this is done through a group called EMI Canada, Engineering Ministries International. And so, I mean, are they paying for this as well, or do people make donations? Who funds this?
We do our own fundraising. So when we plan on going on a trip, we have family and friends and our local churches that help to provide the funds for travel and accommodation and stuff like that. Yeah.
Now you're not going to some of the easiest places in the world either. South Sudan is in the news these days for all the wrong reasons. Lots of in Ethiopia as well. Hunger, battles, wars taking place. Not pleasant places to go. So you guys are literally risking your lives to go here as well.
Yeah, there's some teams have gone into much more risky situations than I have, but definitely Engineering Ministries is about providing engineering services for ministries all over the world.
What motivates you to do that?
Well, I mean, God gave us talents, and I think He really expects us to use not only our financial resources, but our human resources as well. I mean, we can offer them to Him as well.
I mean, I'm just going through my head, actually. I mean, it sounds, wow. I mean, how do you actually do that when you think about it? I'm sure you've got a regular family life and you've got a life here in Lethbridge as well. You're busy like the rest of us, but you made a choice to make some sacrifices here and to just do something to help these people. You're being Jesus to these people. What's the response from the people there?
We are very well received when we're there. Yeah. I mean, they offer to take us on tours. We're usually fed and clothed and really honored.
Oh, I bet. I bet that help is absolutely crucial, makes a difference, and people just are so glad to see you coming in to help from Canada and from Lethbridge at that, So your company, again, BCB Engineering, so congrats to you guys, and Engineering Ministries International, so people can find out more there too if they are watching this saying, hey, I want to get involved in something like that too. EMICanada.org, right?
That's right.
All right, so EMICanada.org. Brian, thank you. We're proud of you. All right, a person from Lethbridge making a difference. Thanks so much. All right, and that's today's Local Connection.
Would you like to share your Southern Alberta news and stories? Contact us at 1-800-414-2545 or email us insight@miraclechannel.ca.
All right, it is a Hot Topic Friday. Whatever's on your mind, we'd love to have you join the conversation. Our lines are completely open right now, so a good chance to get to the phone and join in. 1-888-816-2545, anywhere in Canada, toll free. And again, love to hear your stories on how God has met you in finances, in provision. Had some good stories yesterday on this. So again, just like to hear your thoughts on the tithing and offerings situation there as well. One of our previous callers here talked about she was so happy with her church because they never asked for money. It's kind of a funny thing because I don't think any of us like to ask anybody for money. I mean, do you like to ask somebody to borrow money even? or even to ask for a donation. That's actually in many ways hard to do, okay? But is it wrong for churches to teach on this and encourage people to give? I'm not sure that it is. In fact, if we don't teach our congregations as leaders about the benefits of being generosity and the need to be generous, then we're not equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, are we? Because we don't want to go near that because it's going to offend people. Well, it's kind of funny because Jesus talked a lot about money. And if we're to be like Jesus, then how come we're not talking about money in church? Ever think of that? Well, we don't talk about money. Our congregation likes it when we don't. Who cares? What does God want you to talk about? Does God want us as leaders to equip people about finances? Okay, wisdom as to how to use finances and so forth, but also on the principle of giving, reaping and sowing, and so forth. What do you think? I think it's actually wrong not to do that. Now, it needs to be done without manipulation and so forth, and without pressure, without condemnation, and not even legalistically. I would agree. There's got to be a balance in that. But I think there's actually an obligation on us to do that sort of thing. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Does tithing work? Is it for today? Yes or no? All right. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because it deals with what's very deep at the inside of us here as well. What do we put our dependency on? Where does our sustenance come from? Okay? Do we put our trust in our paycheck, or do we put our trust in God? Okay? Let's face it, all of us probably have a difficulty at some point in our life giving to other people. Okay? It's something we actually literally have to overcome, that fear of not having enough. And if we really believe that God is enough, then we will, I think, in fact, actually be generous and start to give. Okay? So your thoughts on tithing and offerings and so forth. All right, so 1-888-816-2545. I do have some lines open here right now. And I want to pass on a quick good news story here as well. You may have read this. It's just it's kind of a bittersweet story. A gentleman named Don Ritchie just died at 85 years of age, lived in Australia, and he had a nickname, Angel of the Gap. Yeah. Australians are mourning his death because he apparently stopped hundreds of people from jumping off a cliff, literally, to their suicidal deaths. Sydney has a notorious suicide spot there, and it's a cliff, and this gentleman lived across from there, across the street, and he would apparently, when he'd see people actually come up there and he'd spot them, he'd walk across and say, "Hey, is there something I can do to help you?" And he'd actually talk them out of committing suicide, invite them over for breakfast or for a tea, that sort of thing. He's credited officially with saving 160 people over the last 50 years. Isn't that amazing? His family says the number is actually closer to 500. And he's actually been receiving cards of thanks and gifts and so forth over the years from people later coming back to him saying, "Thank you for saving my life." But somebody had to stand in the gap, angel of the gap. Isn't that great? And of course, Jesus encourages us to stand in the gap for people, to pray for them. And I think, doesn't that, we could use that analogy. Are we doing that? And we see people struggling in life. Are we looking for them? And are we taking the time and effort to walk across the street to engage them in that conversation? Is there something I can help you with? Doesn't mean you have to thump them over the head with the Bible, but are we getting involved with them? Are we, are we actively looking for opportunities? Yes or no? Would we have revival? Put it this way, if everybody in the church, even if we had 50% of all, church members in Canada actively looking for opportunities to stand in the gap and to share the gospel or to pray for somebody on a weekly basis, they're looking for opportunities, would we be saying, how come we don't have revival in Canada? What do you think? Would things change? Yes or no? I'd like to hear your thoughts. 1-888-816-2545. Lines open right now. So join the conversation. Carol from Ontario, you're on. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
I go down to Florida every month, and every year for about 5 months. And I go to this one church, and they preach on tithing. And the tithing is you reap what you sow. Like it'll come back to us if we tithe. But if you don't tithe, it tells you in the Bible that you won't reap what God has for you.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. If you're talking about Malachi chapter 3, probably, for example,
Yep.
where it does say, I mean, test me in this. God says, if I won't open up the windows of heaven, bless you, and you'll be protected, right, financially, or you can choose the opposite and actually leave yourself open to be plundered, if you will, by the enemy, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I tithe, and I give more than my tithe. And we're on pensions, and we have more than what we need.
So how does that work? I mean, I think people would ask you, well, if you're on pension, well, how can you have more than you need then? Where does the
He
increase come
just
from?
opens, and it doesn't have to be money,
Okay.
okay? It just has to be maybe something I need, and I pray about it, and God gives it to me.
Interesting. Okay. So provision of whatever you might need.
Right.
Okay.
Right,
Ah,
but He
interesting.
has provided a way so that we can go down to Florida, you know? And, but people in Canada, like I think pastors don't teach enough on tithing.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a fear element that they're wondering, will people leave then, right? And the funny
yeah.
thing is, I mean, if you ask a lot of pastors, I think they will give you some feedback that, in fact, people do leave sometimes. When you preach a series on tithing, it will definitely offend some people. Yeah.
Yes, but they don't understand the tithing, that you give to God and He will give you back 100-fold.
Well, not
doesn't-
necessarily 100-fold, but it does say, some
Yeah.
30, some 60, some 100. And what does that mean exactly? Well, I'm not exactly sure how that means. It just means there's different levels of return, I guess, maybe
Right.
based on our level of faith. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, but that's my input.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. No, thank you for that, Carolyn. I appreciate you making the phone call. And I think you're right I'd like to see more teaching on that. I think there is a hesitancy for Christian leaders to teach on that because it's controversial, and some people will get up and leave offended. I guess the flip side of that is maybe it's good news, because if people are going to leave over something like that, maybe they aren't being a blessing to your church in the first place. And maybe those are the people who aren't giving in the first place. Not that, I think any church is going to, worth its, salt, is going to be serving its people to the fullest of its ability without looking at their tithing records. You know what I mean? They're going to pray for people. They're going to help people out whether they're giving or not, right? Because we do that unconditionally. We're told to love unconditionally that way. So I don't think it's that. And again, I don't think you're buying a blessing from the Lord, but there is something. You see these kinds of principles coming up in Scripture over and over and over again, where God blesses generosity, and He just blesses obedience. Now, the interesting thing is in Matthew 23:23, Jesus talking to the Pharisees, and of course He says, you're tithing off of this and that. They're being very, very particular in their tithing. But He says, you've forgotten, the greater things, that is, love, mercy, justice. Okay? So we can keep the rules of tithing and miss the greater point of all of that, because it should be being done out of love. But an interesting comment that Jesus makes there, and He says, these you should do without leaving the first things undone. In other words, He's telling them to keep tithing. He is. So if people say, well, Jesus never told us to tithe. Well, He did tell the Pharisees to keep tithing. So I guess somebody might argue saying, well, it's just the Pharisees. I don't think so. I think that's meant for all of us, that we need to be continuing in tithing and offering, and also, but being, putting ahead of that, of course, love, justice, and mercy. So, all right. So 1-888-816-2545, lines wide open. Love to hear your stories of how God has met you financially, or maybe you feel God hasn't met you financially. Well, I'd like to hear your stories as well. Sarah says, when that man was killed on that bus, I actually changed my plans for summer vacation. I was on a bus trip and I did not feel safe at all. I don't think he should be allowed to leave treatment. He did horrible things to that poor man. I don't believe that he is cured. Thank you for that, Sarah. This is, of course, referring to the story we talked about earlier. That's Vince Lee, the guy, infamous Greyhound bus passenger situation where he beheaded a fellow passenger. I mean, unbelievable. Proceeded to eat the body parts. Yeah, he's out, going to be getting some day passes in the next while. And again, a lot of people saying, you know what, this is not justice. It's not justice. people changing their vacation plans because of this. It did strike fear in a lot of people's hearts. And again, I think the average Joe on the streets going, something doesn't seem right here. What about the victims? Okay. So again, mercy and justice here. I mean, what's the balance in this? Speaking of which, of course, the Torrey Stafford murder trial got the results back this week. Michael Rafferty, of course, found guilty of murder. But his sentencing, some people not happy about that, sentenced to 25 years. Okay, then he's eligible for parole. By the way, he was also sentenced to 10 years for kidnapping, which is to be served concurrently, not consecutively. In other words, it's just going to be 25 years. I mean, what? They do that in the States. Why not have 35 years? What's wrong with 35 years? Is there something wrong with this guy going away for 35 years? Somehow it seems to send the message that it wasn't that bad. We won't give you 35 years. I mean, we could, but we won't because it wasn't that bad. I mean, ask Torrey Stafford's family. I mean, I'm sure many of you heard their victim impact statements. Horrible stuff. It's just literally torn apart their lives. So I guess let me ask you this. Should there be capital punishment, again, in cases of child murderers? Okay? When the evidence is overwhelmingly conclusive, or in many cases it's actually, a confession as well. I mean, in this case it's not, but let's say if it was a confession, would that in fact be just? And again, I'm reading some of the online things, and you do see both sides of the argument. There's the one side, the liberal side of things, that says, you know what, that would make us just as guilty as, Michael Rafferty. I just don't understand that logic. You're saying that somebody murdering, raping, kidnapping an innocent 8-year-old girl for their own selfish pleasure, and then the government, yes, intentionally